This was your lesson. I whispered those words under my breath as I stood on the front step, hand still on the door handle. My heart pounded like I'd run a sprint, but I hadn't moved more than a few feet. It was early morning, the light barely touching the sky. The air felt cold and raw, cutting into my lungs. I was leaving with my wife and daughters, heading out on what was supposed to be a family trip. We had packed the car the night before, double-checked the suitcases and the snacks, and now we were ready. Or so I thought. For the first few moments, I just stood there, breathing too fast, feeling something tightening in my chest. I forced myself to move. One step, another. The hush of the neighborhood, the distant engine hum from some early commuter, everything around me felt amplified. I opened the passenger door for Sarah, my wife, and she slid in with that same distant expression I'd been seeing for weeks. I climbed behind the wheel. The girls were in the back, half asleep, murmuring their own little conversations. The seatbelt cut across my torso, and when I turned the ignition, the engine's rumble sounded like distant thunder in my ears. I pulled away from the curb. A strange anxiety gnawed at me, and I couldn't name it yet. If I'd known what that day had in store, maybe I wouldn't have tried so hard to appear calm. But at that moment, I was just a man on the road with his family, heading toward what I believed would be a brief escape from our routine. Sarah kept her eyes forward. She didn't say anything, didn't even ask if I'd slept well. Cold, I thought. It's like a permanent chill around her. The highway was nearly empty, so I eased onto it, letting the hum of wheels soothe me. The line zipped under us. The sun began to creep over the horizon. I glanced at Sarah. She was looking out the window, hair lightly catching a ray of sunshine that turned the edges a soft gold. She was beautiful. I used to think that beauty was my anchor, the thing that steadied me on rough waters. Now it felt like a mirror showing me how far apart we'd grown. Still, I tried to push those thoughts aside. We had miles ahead, a family trip, time to relax. But emptiness filled the car. Even the kids seemed oddly subdued. I turned the radio on, just for some background noise. An old classic rock tune crackled through the speakers. Sarah didn't react. I drove for another hour in near silence, broken only by our daughters whispering or shifting in their seats. My mind drifted to all the small signs I'd noticed in recent months. Her sudden late nights at work, the phone calls she took in another room, the way she'd begun locking her phone, an action she'd never bothered with before. Little flickers of suspicion I kept pushing down, telling myself I was imagining it. Then it happened. A black SUV cut across 2 lanes of traffic without warning, swerving into mine. I slammed the brakes. Tires screeched. The girls screamed. My chest pounded, adrenaline flooding my veins. We almost smashed into the guardrail. The SUV roared off. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. Sarah grabbed the dashboard, her face tight. She let out a breath, but it was more annoyance than genuine fear. That single moment of near disaster, my heart still hammered, sweat gathering on my forehead. And yet she looked at me with an expression I couldn't place. Not relief, not gratitude, just emptiness. I pulled over onto the shoulder to calm my shaking limbs. The girls were startled, hugging each other. Sarah stared straight ahead, then turned slowly to me, lips parted, like she wanted to say something. But no words came. She only looked away again, leaving me to collect myself alone. I felt something awaken inside, anger, confusion, betrayal, or maybe all 3 at once. And I realized something was truly broken between us. I didn't speak as we got back on the road. Didn't comfort the kids more than a brief, "We're okay, it's all good." My mind was spinning. That moment made me see I'd been asleep at the wheel of my own marriage. A heaviness settled over me, dragging me down to a place beyond fear. I just drove, my eyes fixed forward, as though searching for a horizon that might bring clarity. But all I saw was that cold distance in Sarah's eyes. We arrived at a mid-range hotel after a long stretch on the interstate. The place had a faded sign and peeling paint around the edges of the building, but it looked clean enough. The kids went off to explore the lobby's snack area, and Sarah lingered behind with our luggage. I checked us in. The desk clerk handed me 2 room keys, one for me and Sarah, and one for the girls, smiling like we were some happy family on vacation. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part just felt numb. We hauled our suitcases up to the 2nd floor. Sarah was quiet. Again. I used to be able to read her moods, slip an arm around her waist, kiss her cheek, and lighten her tension. But that day, I sensed that any physical touch from me would be met with either polite acceptance or an outright flinch. So I kept my distance. Once inside the room, the girls argued over who would get which bed in their separate space. Sarah offered them a smile, but it was a practiced smile, the kind you give coworkers you barely know. My stomach lurched with the knowledge that she no longer reserved her warmth for me. Evening came. We found a small diner next to the hotel for dinner. I tried to keep the conversation casual, asking the girls about school, telling jokes about the dusty decor. They laughed politely, but I could tell they felt the tension between me and their mother. Sarah ate in silence, nibbling a salad, checking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. My entire body was coiled like a spring. When we returned to our rooms, the kids said goodnight and closed their door. Sarah walked into ours, set her phone on the nightstand, and stared out the window. Something about her posture, rigid, arms folded, sparked a memory of the SUV that cut us off. That sense of imminent danger, something on the verge of happening, but you can't stop it. She went to the shower. I sat on the bed, laptop open. And then, almost on autopilot, I opened a dating site. I'm still not sure why I did it. A moment of madness, curiosity, or some desperate need to confirm my worst suspicions. My heart pounded harder with every click, a sick tension building. Then I saw her photo. Hers, my wife, listed under a username I'd never seen before, with a profile that described her in ways only I recognized. References to her love of Italian cooking, her compassionate nature, even the mention of a small scar near her collarbone. A recent picture, her hair arranged just so, her smile bright, her gaze direct. She looked like she was posing for a new life, without me. Blood roared in my ears, the adrenaline as intense as during that near crash on the highway. My breath came fast and shallow. I clicked through the images, read the short bio. She'd written about wanting adventure and passion. The words made my gut churn. My chest tightened, and I squeezed the laptop so hard I worried I'd break it. I felt the pulse in my temples and realized my hands had gone clammy. She was there, openly, shamelessly. I had no illusions left. I closed the laptop with a snap and sat there, my mind flickering through 1,000 images. Memories of our wedding day, her laugh when our first daughter was born, the quiet nights on the couch watching old movies. All of it now felt like a farce. The bathroom door opened, and she stepped out, hair damp, shoulders bare under a thin robe. Our eyes met for a second. She raised an eyebrow, like she was waiting for me to say something. But I didn't. My emotions pulled tight, an invisible wire around my throat. I got up and walked to the window. Outside, the parking lot was half full of cars, the neon sign from the diner flickering. Street lamps cut bright cones of light. I realized I was shaking, and a part of me wanted to turn, to confront her on the spot. But I stayed silent, letting that anger build into a cold, silent vow. If she wanted to keep secrets, then let her. I'd find my own way to handle it. My breathing steadied, my heart still hammered, but my thoughts started to sharpen. I barely slept. She dozed off at some point, or pretended to. I lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Everything felt surreal, like I'd stepped onto a stage in a drama I never auditioned for. The next morning we got up. We went through the motions, half arguing about which tourist spot to visit with the kids. She threw on a casual outfit, jeans, and a floral blouse, looking as if nothing had happened. I watched her, searching for guilt or fear. But I saw none. Just that same distant, unbreakable calm. I loaded the girls into the car. Sarah said she needed a moment to check on something, her phone, I assumed. 10 minutes later she sauntered out, face unreadable. I told myself to wait, to observe. Let her feel secure enough to slip up. Anger simmered low in my gut, but I stayed polite, especially in front of the kids. We spent half the day wandering around a local park, the girls occasionally trying to engage with both of us. I pretended normalcy for their sake. She snapped pictures, posted them on social media, where everything still looked perfect. By afternoon, I was tired of faking smiles. I told them I needed some time alone. Maybe I'd check out a nearby store or get the car washed. Sarah just nodded. Fine. I dropped them off at the hotel and drove away. Except I doubled back, parking discreetly down the block. Part of me was ashamed to be playing detective, but I needed the truth. The question was how far her betrayal had gone. A dating profile was damning. But maybe it was just flirtation. I tried to reason. Then again, the coldness in her eyes told me she was fully prepared to break every vow we'd made. I waited in the car, engine off, windows cracked. 20 minutes later, I saw a sleek blue sedan pull up. A man stepped out, tall, short-cropped hair, confident stride. He wore a casual button-down shirt, jeans that hugged athletic legs. He glanced at his phone, typed something, then walked into the hotel. My hands clenched on the steering wheel. I just knew. There was an ease in his posture like he'd been there before. A minute later, I pulled my cap low over my eyes and followed him in. The lobby was nearly empty. The desk clerk was busy with some paperwork. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the man leaning against the back wall, checking his phone. I waited for the next elevator, heart pounding, mind focused. When I reached our floor, I saw him in the hallway, heading for the room next to ours. The room we booked for the kids. My stomach twisted. The kids were not there. They were sharing a separate space we'd rented just for the night. But Sarah had the keys. Possibly she'd given him one. The door clicked shut behind him. I heard a muffled laugh. Hers. A thunderous pulse filled my ears. I edged closer, pressing to the wall. A muffled sound, intimate, unmistakably adult. My knees went weak, a wave of nausea hitting me. There was no doubt now. She wasn't just playing around online. She was with him, behind that door, betraying me in the rawest, most physical way possible. I inched away. My mind raced. I couldn't barge in there. That would blow everything up in front of the entire hotel. Maybe even involve the kids if they came back early. But the reality of what was happening on the other side of that door felt like a brand searing into my skin. Quiet moans filtered through the thin walls, and I clenched my fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. That single moment changed me. Something in me snapped, but I kept a grip on myself, forcing the rage inside a steel cage. I needed to be calm, methodical, to figure out exactly how to handle this. It lasted about half an hour. I stood by the vending machine at the end of the hall, staring at a blinking soda selection, hearing the faint echoes of their activity. My mouth went dry. My thoughts turned black. But I didn't look away, didn't flee. I waited for him to leave. When he finally emerged, he had a faint smile on his face, and he was adjusting his shirt cuffs. He walked past me without even a glance, the powerful scent of his cologne lingering. My teeth ground so hard I felt my jaw cramp. In that moment, my entire life turned upside down. I let him go. I wanted to rip him apart, but I let him walk. Because I needed the bigger revenge, the final blow that would take down this entire facade she'd built. Back in my car, I gripped the wheel, taking deep breaths. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "We'll meet for dinner at 6, okay?" So casual, as if she'd just stepped out to run an errand. I stared at that text, my vision blurring from fury. Then I typed a simple reply. Sure. My thumbs shook on the screen. I drove around aimlessly, trying to cool the white-hot rage swirling inside. Scenes of them together haunted me. Her arms around his neck, the betrayal spelled out in sweat and soft gasps. By the time I got back to the hotel, it was nearly evening. The kids were back from the pool. Sarah was in fresh clothes, hair damp from a shower, a faint glow on her cheeks that she tried to hide under a neutral expression. The sight of her made my skin crawl, but I forced a friendly act. I greeted the girls warmly, ignoring her. She noticed. Her mouth tightened. We went out for dinner. The tension at the table was sharper than the night before. The kids picked up on it, exchanging worried looks. Sarah said nothing. I asked her a question or two about our plans for tomorrow, but she only shrugged. The girls tried to fill the silence with talk about what they'd seen at the pool. It was awkward, but I endured it. Her phone stayed close to her hand, like a safety net. When the meal ended, we walked back in silence, under the hotel's buzzing neon. A heavy hush fell between us once we got the kids settled in their room. She followed me into ours. I locked the door behind us. She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw something like fear flicker in her eyes. I leaned against the dresser, arms crossed. My chest felt tight, my breathing steady but forced. We stood that way for a long moment, a standoff without words. Then I said, quietly, "Are you happy?" She parted her lips, hesitated, but didn't speak. I repeated, "Are you happy?" She shook her head slightly, as if denying my question even existed. But I continued, my voice low. "I saw you." Still no reply, no protest, just the sudden tension in her posture, the minute trembling in her fingers. All I heard was my own breathing. My mouth felt dry, and I realized my hand had curled into a fist at my side. When she made no effort to deny it, I moved to the window, staring at the same parking lot where I'd stood in fear and suspicion. Her silence was worse than screaming or crying. That cold refusal to engage. She stood there, arms wrapped around herself, eyes downcast. I demanded an explanation, but her lips stayed pressed together. I asked who he was, how long it had been going on, and still no words. Just that distant, haunted gaze. My fury surged, wanting to break everything in the room, to force her to speak. But I held it down. If she needed me to be the monster, I'd become it later. For now, I wanted her to know I was fully aware. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the burn behind my eyelids. Then I spoke, voice shaking, telling her I'd found her profile, that I'd waited outside that room. Her breath caught, a slight quake in her shoulders. She tried to mouth something, maybe an apology or an excuse, but no sound came out. I waited, giving her space to talk. She didn't. A calm, lethal anger surged through me. The distance between us felt like an uncrossable canyon. I left her standing there and walked out, letting the door slam. She didn't follow me. I took a slow, measured walk down the hallway, ignoring the elevator, descending the stairs step by step, until I hit the lobby. My reflection in a glass panel showed a man I barely recognized. Face tight, eyes dark and hollow, jaw clenched in a grim line. In the parking lot, I leaned against my car and lit a cigarette, a habit I'd mostly kicked years ago. The smoke felt harsh in my lungs, but it was something to anchor me. 1,000 thoughts hammered at my skull. The swirl of pain and betrayal was there, but deeper than that was a savage clarity. She'd lied to me. She'd broken our vows. And now she expected. What exactly? Forgiveness. Silence. A passive acceptance that our marriage was a sham. I stayed out there for what felt like an hour, letting the nicotine calm me while the neon sign buzzed overhead. People passed by, strangers entering and leaving the hotel, completely ignorant of the storm inside me. At some point, I remembered the girls. My daughters, who had no idea their world was tilting off its axis. I felt a pang of guilt, but also a renewed sense of purpose. I flicked the cigarette butt aside and went back up. She was lying on the bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, fully dressed. She didn't move or speak when I entered. I sat in a chair near the window, my gaze on her. We remained like that for a long time. Finally, I said, "Pack up in the morning. We're leaving." It was neither a request nor a question. She blinked slowly, some faint twitch of emotion crossing her face. I turned off the lights. That night, I barely rested. My mind was a restless sea of images. Her in another man's arms, the memory of her profile, the near accident on the road. A voice inside me kept whispering, "She did this to you. Don't ever forget." Around 4 in the morning, I dozed off, only to wake with a jerk at 6. She was already up, sitting in the corner, phone in hand, as though she'd been there all night. We didn't exchange good mornings. We just quietly got ourselves together, each lost in our own fortress of hostility. The kids were startled by how early we left, but I mumbled something about wanting to beat traffic. Sarah went along with it. No argument. The girls, half asleep, climbed into the back seat. I took the wheel again. The tension in the car was worse than before, like a living thing pressing in on all of us. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, ignoring the dull ache in my chest. We drove for hours. An idea simmered at the back of my mind. How to use her lie against her. How to take back the control I felt had been snatched from me. This wasn't the place or time, with the kids in the car, but I could sense a plan forming. I began to talk, in a casual tone, about how I needed to swing by my old friend's place in a nearby city. The girls shrugged. They didn't care. They just wanted to sleep or stare at their phones. Sarah stiffened. She likely suspected something, but she didn't protest. We arrived at a modest suburban neighborhood, where a friend of mine, an ex-military buddy, lived. I told Sarah to wait in the car while I picked something up. She gave me a wary look. The girls were distracted, so she didn't make a scene. I stepped out, walking up to my friend's door. I explained in hushed tones that I needed a favor. I'd call him soon, lay out some details. He nodded, concerned, but didn't pry. We parted with a handshake that felt loaded with subtext. Back in the car, I glanced at Sarah in the rearview mirror. Her eyes met mine. She knew something was brewing. Part of me wanted her to feel the dread I'd felt, to sense the ground shifting under her feet. I pulled away from the curb, heading toward home. The rest of the drive passed in grim silence, the kids occasionally whining about hunger or thirst, but otherwise subdued. Sarah stared out her window, chewing on her lips. I flicked my gaze at her every so often, remembering the sound of her with him, the small gasp that confirmed everything I'd feared. My jaw clenched until it ached. Finally, we reached our house. I unlocked the door, stepped inside first. The familiar scent and the half-darkness of the hallway greeted me. The kids rushed in, relieved to be home. Sarah paused at the threshold, as though uncertain. I turned on the lights, set my keys on the table. She moved past me quietly, heading toward the bedroom. I saw her shoulders sag in what might have been either resignation or exhaustion. For the next few days, we existed in a strained truce. She went about daily tasks with a mechanical efficiency. I continued my work. Marketing projects demanded attention. But every moment I was alone, my mind drifted back to the betrayal. We barely spoke, except for necessary words about the children or the house. The tension hovered in every room, thick enough to choke on. Our daughters noticed, but we made excuses, telling them we were both busy, that we were tired from the trip. They didn't quite believe us, but they're young. They didn't push. Sarah's phone never left her side. Once or twice, I thought I heard her speaking in hushed tones when she believed I was out of earshot. The fury inside me burned hotter. I wanted to confront her again, to tear down whatever illusion she clung to. But I forced myself to wait. I wanted a final decisive act that would leave no room for her to wriggle out with half-truths and apologies. I bided my time. I observed her routine, memorized her habits. She worked part-time for an HR consulting firm. Sometimes she left early, sometimes she came home late. I began quietly calling in small favors from old acquaintances, my friend from the suburbs, a cousin who dabbles in private investigation, another friend who's a whiz at hacking phone records. It was petty, it was invasive, but I couldn't bring myself to care. She had started this war by opening our marriage to another man. I intended to end it on my terms. One afternoon, about a week after we returned, I told Sarah I had a late meeting. She nodded, expressionless. I knew from a text intercept that she'd arranged to see him that evening. She'd used the same phrases in her profile, looking forward to an adventure, plus an address in a quiet part of town. My stomach churned, imagining them together again. But I pushed it down. I left the house around 6. Instead of going to any meeting, I parked in a place that gave me a view of the building she'd specified. Sure enough, at 6:30, her car rolled up. She got out, wearing a modest blouse and skirt, hair pinned up, carefully casual. She entered the building. My chest felt like it was full of broken glass. I sat there, letting the minutes drag by, the tension building like a thunderstorm on the horizon. Shortly after, that blue sedan arrived. He stepped out, tall, confident, scanning the area before heading inside. My hands twitched on the wheel. The urge to confront them now was overwhelming. But no, I told myself. Wait for the right moment. About 30 minutes later, I slipped out of my car. Heart pounding, I made my way up a stairwell, found the door to an apartment my sources had said belonged to him. I placed an ear to it. Their voices were faint inside. My breath came in short bursts, adrenaline racing. I tried the doorknob, locked, of course. I pulled out a small gadget my cousin had given me, some sort of improvised device for surveillance. I threaded it carefully against the door, hooking it to the peephole from outside, aligning the tiny camera so I could see inside. The feed went to my phone. The image flickered and stabilized, revealing a partial view of the living room. Empty. Then they came into frame. Sarah's hair was down, her arms around his neck. They kissed deeply. My heart thundered in my chest. I saw him slide his hands under her blouse. She let out a small gasp. She pressed herself against him, arching her body. I turned away, shutting my eyes. Even though I was prepared for it, the sight still burned. My phone screen was capturing it all, though the angle was limited. A mixture of shame and satisfaction coursed through me. This was my proof, the final nail. They moved out of view, presumably into the bedroom. My jaw clenched so hard I felt it crack. The faint sounds of laughter, moans, and the rustle of clothing trickled through the door. My anger swelled, pulsing in my temples, but I forced myself to stay silent. After what felt like hours, they came back into the living room. Sarah looked flushed, hair disheveled. He poured her a glass of wine. She smiled at him. That image, her relaxed, content expression, was like a knife twisting in my chest. I ended the recording, reeling the small camera back into my pocket. Quietly, I hurried back to my car. I sat there, phone in hand, breath ragged. My face felt hot. I'd seen enough. I had enough evidence to burn her world down if I chose. But what now? I'd fantasize about violence, about barging in and making them pay. But I knew that wasn't the route. I needed something colder, more exacting. Over the next few days, I gathered everything. Screenshots of her profile, copies of messages, the discreet video from the door. I compiled it into a single folder on my computer labeled only with her name. Then I prepared my own exit plan. I took money out of our joint accounts, carefully, so as not to arouse suspicion. I changed passwords, updated my personal bank accounts, locked down any business finances she could access. She was too preoccupied with her affair to notice. I also found out more about that man, Daniel. He was an 8 hotshot with a big salary. No wife, no kids. He'd left a string of relationships behind him. Clearly the type who thrived on the thrill of stealing another man's woman, then discarding her. My resentment toward him sharpened each time I uncovered a new detail, but my anger at Sarah was worse. She chose to do this with him. He didn't vow to love me for life. She did. When everything was in place, I confronted her at home. The kids were out at a friend's house for the afternoon. Perfect timing. I found her in the living room, reading on the couch. She glanced up, saw the expression on my face, and set her book aside. I took a seat across from her, leaning forward. Slowly, I told her I knew every detail, that I'd seen her with him. I described the videos, the messages, leaving out nothing. A flicker of panic crossed her eyes, but again, she didn't speak. She just pressed her lips together until they turned white. I told her we were done. I was going to a lawyer first thing in the morning. She could expect divorce papers by the end of the week. Her mouth parted, shock apparent. But she didn't beg, didn't cry. She stared at me, a sheen of tears in her eyes, but no words. I pressed on. Quiet, controlled rage dripped from every syllable as I explained how I would protect my interests, how I'd keep the house and ensure the kids stayed with me. The hush in the room was thunderous. Then came a moment I hadn't anticipated. She swallowed, tried to say something, but her voice was a rasp. There was no apology, no explanation, just a choked whisper of my name, as if that alone could fix anything. I let the silence flood back in, stared at her for a long, excruciating moment. The memory of her moaning in that hotel room, the sight of them entwined, replayed behind my eyes. A wave of disgust rose in me. I forced myself to remain calm. Why? I finally asked. She looked at me, tears now brimming, but she still wouldn't speak. The anger in me flared hotter than ever. Answer me, I demanded. She shook her head. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. A savage part of me almost admired how consistent she was, maintaining that stony silence, no matter how I tried to provoke her. I got up, pacing the living room, fists clenched. Then I turned and said, "You want him? Fine. Go to him." Her eyes widened slightly. "Pack your things. Leave." I stepped forward. She shrank back, pressing into the couch. For a moment, I felt a surge of pity for us both. Then I crushed it. She just sat there, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. The only words I heard her form were the faintest, "I'm sorry." I paused. That apology hung in the air like a distant echo. I glared at her. "No, you're not," I said. "Not enough to explain. Not enough to speak up before I found out. You're only sorry I caught you." My voice shook at the end, the rage turning sour in my throat. I walked out of the house, leaving her in that silent, tearful state. It felt like a dream, like I was stepping out of my own body and floating through a harsh, black sky. I got into my car, but I didn't drive off immediately. Instead, I clenched the steering wheel, head bowed, and let out a single ragged exhale. That evening, I made calls to finalize everything. My attorney friend was sympathetic, offering to expedite the paperwork. My detective-minded cousin had already provided me with copies of everything that could be relevant in court. If she tried to fight me for custody or finances, I would bury her in evidence. Yes, it was cruel. Yes, it was calculated, but I felt no remorse. Not after what she'd done. She came into our bedroom around midnight, wearing the same robe she'd worn in that hotel. My stomach churned. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, tears tracking silently down her face. I expected her to speak, to beg, but she didn't. Finally, I said, "Get out." My voice was low and flat. She stood there for another second, then turned and walked away. For the next few days, we existed in the same house, but different worlds. The kids sensed the shift. They asked me if Mommy was okay. I lied, told them she was just tired or stressed. She avoided them, too ashamed or too broken to maintain her usual facade. I watched her grow thinner, her eyes ringed with shadows. I felt no pity. My sense of betrayal overshadowed everything. Then came the final confrontation. She must have reached her limit of shame and silence. Late one evening, she stepped into the living room, where I was sitting in the dark. She stood there for a long time, as if summoning the courage to speak. Finally, she said, "Michael," in a trembling voice. It was the first time she'd spoken my name in days, and that single word carried a mountain of emotion: fear, regret, desperation. I stood up slowly, flicked on a lamp. Her eyes were red. I could see the reflection of my own hardness in them. She opened her mouth like she wanted to pour out an apology, a confession, anything. But I cut her off with a quiet statement. "I already started the paperwork. You'll be served soon." She drew in a shaky breath. For a moment, it looked like she might fling herself at my feet, but something in her snapped. Her shoulders squared. No more tears. She stared at me, mouth tight, and gave me the tiniest nod, as if acknowledging the final blow. Then she turned and walked away, leaving me alone in that pool of lamplight. The next morning, I woke up early and left. I didn't say goodbye to her. I kissed the kids on the forehead while they slept. I got in my car and drove, not sure where I was heading. I found myself following the same highway we'd taken for that ill-fated trip. The sky was overcast, the road slick from a recent rain. The lines on the asphalt blurred in my vision. I remembered the SUV that cut us off, how close we came to smashing into the guardrail. The adrenaline, the fear, and her cold, distant face. I tightened my grip on the wheel and thought, this is the real accident. The collision came later, with my heart slamming into the truth of who she was, what she was willing to do. There was no seatbelt, no airbag for that crash. Only pain, and then this new, hollow existence. Hours passed before I turned back. The entire time, I replayed everything in my head. Her profile, the nights she came home late, that humiliating half-hour by the hotel vending machine. I realized something. Time wouldn't fix this. It wouldn't soothe the ache or make me forget. It would just erase the details, dull the edges, until one day I'd be left with a scar. That's how time worked. It didn't heal so much as it ground everything down. When I finally returned home, she was gone. I walked into an empty living room. The kids were at school. The kitchen table had a note on it. "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." But I knew it wasn't a plea for real forgiveness. It was her last, desperate attempt at leaving a mark on my conscience. I stared at the paper, at the trembling script. I tore it in half and dropped the pieces in the trash. I made coffee. The house was deathly silent, but I welcomed it. I sipped from the mug, looked around at what used to be our family home, and realized it was mine now. Cold, hollow, but still mine. And I thought back to that first moment I'd felt something was wrong, when that SUV nearly smashed us on the highway. The panic, the surge of adrenaline, the clarity that followed. It was like fate had tried to warn me how quickly life can change. I found a slip of paper in my pocket, old and crumpled. I remembered carrying it around as a kind of talisman, in case I ever needed a push to walk away from a broken situation. The words had once seemed so powerful, something along the lines of, "If you must let go, do it swiftly." Now, those words were irrelevant. I'd already made my choice. I glanced at the clock. The kids would be home soon, and I'd have to explain where their mother had gone. I felt a twinge of pain for them. They didn't deserve any of this. But life doesn't wait for permission before it fractures. My phone buzzed with a message. From my lawyer, or from the bank, or from a friend, I wasn't sure. I didn't even check it. I needed a moment to savor the quiet, to gather myself before the next wave of responsibilities crashed down. In that hush, I repeated the words I'd started with in my head. This was your lesson. Maybe it was hers, maybe it was mine. Maybe it was both. But either way, there was no going back. I set down my coffee and walked to the window, looking out over the street. The day was moving on. So would I. The end came not with an explosion, but with a slow fade of everything we once had. It felt frightening in its finality. And yet, in that silent room, I found an odd sort of relief. My heart still ached with betrayal, but my anger had tempered into resolve. The knowledge that I'd survived this, that I'd taken control of my life, gave me a grim satisfaction. The next steps wouldn't be easy. Raising 2 daughters through a divorce, navigating all the legalities. But I'd do it on my terms, free from her deceit. I turned from the window, taking one last look at the torn note in the trash, and walked away without another backward glance. The house was mine now, quiet and honest in its emptiness, just as I intended my future to be. I thought of her cold, distant face one last time, and I almost laughed. Time wouldn't heal me. It would only erase, bit by bit, until the pain was a dull echo. That would have to be enough. And maybe that was the lesson all along.